Domain expansions are known as the peak of sorcery and the final move for any sorcerer who's able to pull one off. By using an innate domain and cursed energy to construct a barrier, sorcerers can summon their trump cards in form of domain expansions, which can shift the tide of any downhill battle. With the release of chapter 223 kicking off what seems to be the start of the final battle between two of the strongest sorcerers we've ever seen, it's clear to everyone that this battle will likely come down to a brawl between domain expansions. The debate between Satoru Gojo's Unlimited Void against Ryomen Sukuna's Malevolent Shrine or Chimera Shadow Garden has been an ever-growing discussion for some time, so naturally many in the fandom have been split between these two monsters, defeating one another in a hypothetical domain battle. In this video, I'll be going over the possible outcomes in a domain clash between Satoru Gojo and Ryomen Sukuna, and discuss who would actually come out on top between two of the strongest characters that we've ever seen. If you would enjoy to see more JJK content, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and comment on some video ideas you want to see be done down below. First, I'll start with the less complicated of the two domain expansions, Satoru Gojo's Unlimited Void. Unlimited Void is a domain expansion created through the Limitless Curse technique, meaning only users of the 6 eyes can bring out its true combat potential. As of chapter 224, the only character that we've ever seen or know of to achieve this level of Jujutsu is Satoru Gojo himself. By opening his Unlimited Void, Gojo can bring his opponents inside the Limitless itself and stun them in place as long as needed. This is all possible by using Unlimited Void's sure hit attack, which comes in form of an endless amount of information. In the fan book, it's actually stated that the information gained through Unlimited Void forces its victims to endlessly perform life activities like perception and communication, in that the target is hit with an infinite amount of information and gently guided towards death. The information transferred is actually so vast and extreme that it's able to leave multiple special grade level curse spirits rendered completely harmless. And this all happened while Unlimited Void was only active for less than a split second, meaning if Sukuna enters Gojo's domain without negating the sure hit effect, he'll become overloaded with information and surely lose the battle, but we'll touch back on this a little bit later. We've only actually ever seen this domain expansion twice throughout the entire series. The first is all the way back in chapter 15 during Gojo's first encounter with Jogo. Upon entering the domain expansion, Gojo was able to completely negate and disarm Jogo's domain, which would have immediately burnt any average sorcerer to ash. It's not until Shibuya in chapter 89 that we actually get to see Unlimited Void in action for a second time. During Gojo's second battle with Jogo and the rest of the disaster curses, we get to see one of the greatest feats ever performed using domain expansion. What's most impressive about this was that it was revealed that Unlimited Void could be used in very short durations, even as short as 0.2 seconds, and as I've mentioned earlier, that's even enough to disarm multiple special grade level curse spirits. But now let's move on to Sukuna's domain expansion and one of the most renowned domain expansions in the entire series, Malevolent Shrine. It's a domain expansion created through Sukuna's curse technique, which as of recording this video, we still don't have an official name for. However, we can still see what we know about Sukuna's curse technique being displayed in its fullest combat potential by using Malevolent Shrine. This domain expansion of course also has a sure hit technique in form of two different slashing attacks, Cleave and Dismantle. Malevolent Shrine uses both of these slashing attacks to attack absolutely everything in its radius. Anything with cursed energy is targeted with Cleave, and for inanimate objects like buildings or inorganic structures, they're targeted specifically with Dismantle. The slashing attacks are also completely invisible to the naked eye, making them hard to be countered by any unknowing opponent. Sukuna's slashes are relentless and won't stop as long as Malevolent Shrine is actively expanded. But by far the most impressive quality about Sukuna's domain is the open barrier that he uses when he expands Malevolent Shrine. As of recording this video, Kenjaku and Sukuna are the only two sorcerers who we know of that can perform this level of Jujutsu. And keep in mind, Kenjaku is said to be the second best barrier user in the entire series. And even Tengen, someone who's regarded as the best barrier user of all time, mentions that Sukuna's use of an unconventional barrier in his domain expansion is an amazing feat, meaning Sukuna is living up to the standard of two of the best barrier technique users in the entire series. There's a common misconception mainly stemming from the English release of Jujutsu Kaisen, where many in the fandom are misled into believing that Sukuna's Malevolent Shrine actually doesn't have a barrier at all. Many translators in the community have reviewed the original Japanese kanji and have given a more accurate English translation and claim that Sukuna is simply expanding an open barrier rather than no barrier at all, and this idea is also more consistent overall with things I've mentioned earlier like Tengen's statement from chapter 206. Malevolent Shrine not having a physical barrier to trap its opponents means Sukuna's domain expansion has the same major downside as someone like Megami's incomplete Chimera Shadow Garden, and it's that without an outer shell, this domain leaves room for an escape route to be created to escape its area of effect. Assuming you can exit the guaranteed hit's effective range before you're cut to pieces, Sukuna's domain expansion and his final trump card would be completely useless. But actually escaping the range of Malevolent Shrine is way easier said than done. This domain expansion has the largest area of effect that we've ever seen throughout the entire series. By creating and allowing an escape route, Sukuna can leverage a binding vow to extend the guaranteed hit's effective range nearly as far as 200 meters. This can also be narrowed down as we see during the Shibuya incident. Sukuna dilutes the range of Malevolent Shrine all the way down to 140 meters to protect Megami. To really put into perspective how monstrous the range of Sukuna's Malevolent Shrine is, opposed to any other domain expansion that we've ever seen, domains like Dagon's and Mahito's are perfect examples of the negatives of barrier-bound domains. If we take Mahito's domain for example, it's shown to be smaller than the neighboring buildings it's expanded near, and in Dagon's case, a building's able to contain the barrier completely fine, while Malevolent Shrine is able to easily cut down a fraction of Shibuya to dust. Of course, as we all know, the inside of domain expansions can potentially be vastly larger than the barriers they're expanded inside, to the point where even Dagon's domain became an entire island, but Sukuna's domain being able to reach nearly 200 meters means his opponents can be caught inside Malevolent Shrine at a much farther distance compared to normal barriers, which have to trap opponents inside first before its effectiveness can become fully realized. Now that I've gone over both Gojo's Unlimited Void and Sukuna's Malevolent Shrine, I can begin going over the factors between both domains in a hypothetical clash. While domain expansions are by far the most renowned ability in Jujutsu Kaisen, domain clashes and even references to possible domain battles are few and far between, but in chapter 15, which is also titled Domain, it's the first and only instance where two complete domains are activated one after another, and it's the only time that we ever get to see a domain battle in action throughout the entire manga. However, this is also the same battle I mentioned earlier while covering Unlimited Void, where Gojo is able to completely neutralize Jogo's domain expansion with ease. To say it's not exactly the battle between domains that many of us imagined would be an understatement, but we do actually learn a fair bit about domain expansions during this fight. According to Gojo, once inside a domain expansion, the environment grants the caster an upgrade in stats similar to a buff in video games. When two domain expansions clash, there are various properties involved that can determine the outcome of a domain battle. For example, if two domains are expanded at the same time, the more polished and more refined domain expansion will overtake the other, but it can also depend on compatibility and cursed energy. When taking compatibility into account, there's no real metric to compare something like Unlimited Void going up against Malevolent Shrine or Chimera Shadow Garden, and this is because we don't exactly know what attributes are being compared from any of these domains. Maybe if this was a domain battle between Hanami and Jogo, we can theorize that because Hanami's domain might be wood-based and Jogo's domain is fire-based, Jogo might have the compatibility advantage there because he can simply burn down Hanami's domain like a forest fire. But when we compare Jogo's domain to somebody like Yorozu, they're so vastly different that we actually have just no way of comparing these two in terms of compatibility. As for cursed energy, we don't exactly know what the criteria for this is either. Whether Gojo's talking about the total volume of cursed energy that the caster has when summoning a domain expansion, or the amount that they output into that same domain expansion, or even the cursed energy trait of the caster going up against his opponent, we simply have no way to measure any of these. Even if this was in reference to the amount of cursed energy that would be outputted from domain expansion from either Gojo or Sukuna, or their own total volume, we still have no way to compare any of these. There's the argument to be made that maybe because of Gojo's 6 eyes, he can conserve more cursed energy while using his curse techniques, therefore his cursed energy volume and output would be higher than Sukuna, but that's not necessarily true. The only thing that we know for sure is that he uses less cursed energy, but that doesn't mean that his total volume or output should be higher than Sukuna. The last gauge that we have to judge both domains off of what Gojo says is refinement. Between Unlimited Void and Malevolent Shrine, in short, when comparing both domains, Sukuna seems to be the more dominant one in this area. Aside from Tengen's statement I mentioned earlier about domains expanded using an open barrier being an amazing feat, Sukuna's domain is stated to be nothing less than divine. If expanding a domain is the same thing as an artist having free range on a canvas to illustrate their masterpiece, then Sukuna is basically painting on thin air. However, we also see inside Dagon's domain that the more refined barrier doesn't necessarily determine the outcome of a domain battle. While Dagon has a complete domain with a barrier in form of an outer shell, Megami was able to expand his incomplete Chimera Shadow Garden and lock his and Dagon's domain into a stalemate, or if you prefer what Dagon calls it, a domain tug of war. Megami's domain had such an effect on Dagon's domain that it was even able to neutralize the sure hit effect that he had used earlier on Naobito, Nanami, and Maki. And keep in mind, all of this happened while Chimera Shadow Garden was stated to be incomplete and didn't have a barrier at all. Obviously, the barrier quality of both Gojo and especially Sukuna is much higher than Megami and Dagon. The idea of having a high quality barrier being the sole factor in winning a domain fight clearly isn't true. Megami being able to contend with Dagon's domain, which definitively outclasses Megami in terms of barrier quality, means that we can't say that having a higher quality barrier completely determines the outcome of a domain fight. This concept is made even more consistent and even more solidified when taking into account somebody like Kenjaku. When Kenjaku expands his domain, he's able to do it with that same open outer shell, just like Sukuna did with Malevolent Shrine during the Shibuya incident. Tengen even compares it to Malevolent Shrine, and that's where we get that statement I've been referencing about it being such an impressive feat to expand the domain with an open outer shell. But Kenjaku has stated multiple times that Gojo is simply too powerful and gets in the way of his plans. If Kenjaku could just simply open up his domain and override Gojo's Unlimited Void, because Kenjaku's barrier is of a higher quality than Gojo's, therefore he'd override Gojo's unlimited void in the event of a domain clash, then it doesn't make any sense that he believes that he's powerless against somebody like Satoru Gojo. Overall, for the context that we have to go off of, there isn't a clear answer for unlimited void or malevolent shrine being able to override one another in a domain clash, but the simplest way to figure out who would win between two of the strongest characters in the entire series in the event of a domain clash is by separating them into different rounds with different possible outcomes. So first, I'll be obviously starting with round 1. For each of these rounds, I'll say that just like Ryu, Oro, and Yuta, Gojo and Sukuna come to a point where they realize that words are pointless, and all that's left is for both of them to activate domain expansion. For round 1, Gojo begins opening up unlimited void, and Sukuna begins opening up malevolent shrine, and they begin having a domain tug of war. We see this happen to Megami and Dagon during the Shibuya incident like I've mentioned earlier, and while neither Dagon or Megami's domain became completely neutralized, Megami was still able to cancel out Dagon's sure hit attack, and it's also stated during the three-way domain clash in Sendai Colony that overlapping domain expansions cancel out all other sure hit attacks. This means that neither Sukuna's sure hit slashing attacks or Gojo's endless knowledge sure hit attack are active inside this domain, but this also means that Gojo's infinity will still be a problem for Sukuna, as we see Dagon was still able to use his curse techniques even though his domain and Megami's domain were still having a tug of war. Without a sure hit attack to guarantee any attacks making physical contact with Gojo, he'll become virtually untouchable. The fanbook even goes as far as calling it a barrier that manifests infinity and prevents any contact. Without a sure hit attack, Malevolent Shrine can't touch Gojo, and neither Cleave or Dismantle will ever make it past infinity. Of course, Sukuna can attempt to outlast Gojo's domain, but that's easier said than done. We know that because Gojo has the 6 eyes, he can fight for an extremely long time because he uses nearly zero cursed energy when activating a curse technique. When we also take into account that Gojo has reverse curse technique to minimize the strain on his brain from keeping infinity active, it means that not only can Gojo spam his attacks like red, blue, or even purple, but he'll never get tired. Gojo can definitely outlast Sukuna if it came down to it. We also know that if the domain ends, Gojo is the only confirmed sorcerer in the entire series who can activate his domain expansion multiple times in one day. So if it came down to it and the domain ended, Gojo can eventually open up another domain and trap Sukuna again, but this time we can't say for sure that Sukuna can reopen Malevolent Shrine and cancel out the sure hit effect from Gojo's domain. If Sukuna is trapped inside and hit with Gojo's sure hit effect, he'll be stunned within a split second and likely lose the battle if it ever came down to a stalemate between Malevolent Shrine and Unlimited Void, so Gojo would likely win this round. For the second round, Gojo and Sukuna begin opening up their domain expansions again, except for this round, Sukuna chooses to do something a little bit differently. Sukuna begins to use Megami's Chimera Shadow Garden by using the 10 Shadows curse technique instead of expanding his own original Malevolent Shrine. The reason why I haven't mentioned Chimera Shadow Garden all that much in this video is because we really don't know what it would look like in Sukuna's hands. The only version of Chimera Shadow Garden that we've seen is Megami's unpolished and incomplete version of the domain, which he even admits is pathetic. While I do believe Sukuna's mastery of Malevolent Shrine could be applied to this domain expansion, that still doesn't answer much of our question of what this domain is going to look like, which makes this round more of a theory of what this domain could be in Sukuna's hands, rather than something like Malevolent Shrine that we've seen in action and we know what it can do. But if we were to judge by what we know for sure, judging by Megami's use of Chimera Shadow Garden, this is what we know. This domain is stated to bring out the potential of the 10 Shadows curse technique all the way to about 120%, and this is all without using a barrier to create its own sure hit attack. The only thing you can really do with this version of Chimera Shadow Garden is increase the effectiveness of the 10 Shadows curse technique. We see Megami is able to create duplicates of his Shikigami Niue, and he's also able to make his own clones, which he can use to jump his opponents. While at face value, giving up a sure hit attack might be the biggest downside to this domain, while Reggie was on the receiving end of this domain in full effect, he even admits that this is better than having a can't miss attack. If Sukuna is able to increase the effectiveness of Chimera Shadow Garden even further, it can completely shift the battle in his favor. Because Megami's domain expands with no barrier, it means opponents can easily escape its range. But having an escape route inside of his domain purposely is not something Sukuna isn't familiar with. When using Malevolent Shrine, Sukuna allows an escape route purposely inside of his domain to leverage a binding vow to increase the area of effect almost as far as 200 meters. And Sukuna might be able to do the same thing with Chimera Shadow Garden because it already has an escape route. If Gojo opens up his domain expansion and Sukuna expands Chimera Shadow Garden, Gojo may have just mistakenly trapped himself inside one of the most potentially powerful domains in the entire series. Sukuna may be able to summon multiple Shikigami just like Megami, except Sukuna's arsenal of Shikigami seems to be far larger than Megami's. Aside from the deer and bull Sukuna can summon that we've never actually seen Megami take advantage of, Sukuna is also able to summon Maharaga. Maharaga, having the ability to adapt to any phenomena, may prove to be a problem for Gojo to take on alone. While one hollow purple may be enough to take down Maharaga, an army of this monster may prove to be a little bit difficult. It is debatable if Maharaga can actually adapt to infinity, but if he can adapt to infinity and Sukuna can spawn an army of them, it may be a little bit too much for Gojo to take on his own. There's always the possibility that Gojo's domain or Sukuna's domain can simply neutralize the other before a real domain battle could ever occur, but we simply don't know for sure until the real battle happens, so let me know your thoughts below. If you would enjoy more JJK content, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and comment on some video ideas you want to see be done down below.